On BBC One in 20 minutes, Match of the Day. And that's after the news and sport at 10:10 with Peter Sissons and Helen Rollason.
Police digging at a house in Gloucester believe they've found 2 more bodies. It brings the number found to 5, and police say there may be more. In Bosnia, the UN airlifts wounded from Mostar but warns the ceasefires may not last unless they get more troops. And Rob Andrew kicks England to victory against the French. Good evening. Police in Gloucester tonight discovered what they believe are the remains of 2 more bodies in the cellar of a house in the city. And they say there's a distinct possibility there may be more. 3 bodies were found in the garden last week. Frederick West, the owner of the house, has already been charged with murdering 3 women, including his daughter.
The painstaking search of 25 Cromwell Street took on a new urgency tonight. As the excavations went on, the police revealed that they found what they believe are the remains of 2 more people.
This afternoon, police officers still performing the excavations in Cromwell Street found in 2 separate areas what is considered to be 2 significant and separate finds. I'm not in a position at this moment to give a clear indication as to whether these are or not human remains, but that is a distinct possibility.
Throughout the day, the street reverberated with the sound of pneumatic drills as police smashed their way through the concrete flooring. Electronic equipment has been brought in to scan underground. 2 families in Gloucestershire have been informed of today's findings, although formal identification is likely to take some time. 3 bodies have already been found in the garden, and the police believe the death toll may rise further still.
I have reason to believe that there may be other remains in the area, but I am not in this position at this time to explain that further. We will continue to excavate. We have found no more remains or any indications at this time.
The owner of the house, Frederick West, has already been charged with the murder of 3 women, including his daughter and a former lodger. The search of the garden has been completed. Now every inch of the house will be examined. And tonight police said they may start digging at other addresses in the county. David GARMSTON, BBC News, Gloucester.
In Bosnia, 4 people have been killed and another 6 injured in an artillery attack on the town of Zenica. It's the most serious outbreak of violence in the area since a Muslim-Croat ceasefire came into effect. In the southern city of Mostar, 39 wounded civilians have been brought out in the first UN evacuation since January.
The civilian casualties were the first to be evacuated from Mostar in weeks. More than 50,000 people, mainly Muslims, have been besieged in a small enclave in the eastern side of the city for 11 months. The shelling from Croatian positions has been ferocious. A week-old ceasefire and a proposed federation between Croats and Bosnian Muslims gave Spanish United Nations troops the opportunity to organise the evacuation. Many of the wounded have lost limbs, some had head wounds. All could not have been given proper treatment in Mostar.
The injuries they're suffering from cannot be satisfactorily treated in Mostar and can be easily treated abroad.
The casualties are benefiting from a ceasefire that's changing central Bosnia. Under its conditions, new United Nations checkpoints are being established with Croat and Bosnian policemen working together. It's a historic moment and it's happening fast. Just hours ago, these men would have been operating checkpoints on their own side of the lines. They're the kind of barriers that have separated communities and strangled aid. To help keep up the momentum towards peace, British United Nations troops have set up a new base. It's another demand on a command already stretched. The base is in Jepša, where local Croats have been fighting alongside Bosnian Serbs against Muslims. It's difficult to imagine a more sensitive assignment, and the light dragoons are preparing for the worst. 6 mortar rounds, almost certainly from Serb positions, have been fired at the camp. The Bosnian Serbs view the agreements between Croats and Muslims with alarm, and their army in central Bosnia is still in a position to cause trouble. The shelling of 3 towns today, leading to the deaths of 4 people, is probably meant as some kind of warning. Martin Dawes, BBC News, Central Bosnia.
In Sarajevo, the ceasefire appears to have been holding, but UN officials say their resolve's been tested several times. The UN Security Council's calling for a complete ceasefire in the city and for public services to be restored.
Saturday shopping in Sarajevo, where a mortar killed 68 people 1 month ago. Now there's a ceasefire, but life is far from normal. Across the street from the infamous shell hole, a man tries to sell Ramadan bread, 2 Deutschmarks each, about 80 pence. Double a month's salary for those lucky enough to have a job. The streets reek with rubbish, the electricity supply is fitful, water collection is still a daily ritual. But there are individual efforts being made amongst the wreckage and the dirt.
Day by day, people are trying to claw back the little normalities of life, but they're not optimistic, and they're living in a city which is still under siege.
Admittedly, the UN now has a mandate to sort out the utilities and to open up the city. However, it hasn't yet succeeded in piercing the line which divides Serb-held areas from the rest, and it doesn't have the troops to open up and patrol roads to the outside world. And what about the ceasefire? It's a con, says one. I don't believe it, says another. For they've buried nearly 10,000 of their fellow citizens during this siege, and the UN has yet to win their confidence. Kate Adie, BBC News, Sarajevo.
Right-wing parties in South Africa have confirmed that they'll boycott the country's first multiracial elections next month. The decision was taken in Pretoria at a meeting of the Afrikaner People's Front, an alliance of groups demanding self-rule for whites.
So now there is no doubt the right wing, some of them spoiling for a fight from the outset, will not contest next month's elections. The decision, whether he admits it in public or not, is a blow for General Constant Viljoen, who always negotiated for Afrikaner independence in the hope of avoiding conflict. Those lobbying this afternoon's meeting made clear, however, that that was not a favoured option. And early this evening, the overriding view was finally to reject South Africa's constitution and boycott the elections. The reaction from the AWB resistance movement leader, Eugene Terblanche, was predictable.
How's the meeting going, Mr. Terblanche?
Fine. Wonderful.
The question now is, will the Zulu-based Inkatha Freedom Party put their own support to the test in an election? They registered last night, but on condition that international mediation delivers for them a degree of independence for KwaZulu-Natal and a postponed election. That, for Nelson Mandela, is out of the question. With just 7 weeks to go, 29 parties have registered for April's elections. Mediation is unlikely to persuade Inkatha or the right to accept the view of the majority. John Harrison, BBC News, Johannesburg.
In America, the Clinton administration was shaken today with the resignation of the president's chief White House lawyer in connection with the Whitewater property affair. Bernard Nussbaum was one of 6 White House staff called to give evidence before a special prosecutor investigating Whitewater, a failed Arkansas property development scheme in which the Clintons invested.
As a result of their own bungling, the White House staff have now brought the Whitewater affair crashing about their ears. President Clinton left for Camp David as 6 key staff members were being compelled to testify on secret briefings they received from Treasury Department officials on the status of one of many investigations that form part of the widening financial scandal. The White House lawyer, Bernard Nussbaum, who mistakenly permitted the secret briefings to take place, has been forced to resign.
We have to be careful. I think I have sent a very clear and unambiguous signal that there's no point in letting a process mess this White House up when we have not yet been accused of any wrongdoing.
Whitewater began as an investigation into land deals in Arkansas while Bill Clinton was the state's governor. But now the special prosecutor is demanding a new pathologist's report on the shooting death of Mr. Nussbaum's former deputy, Vincent Foster, the Clinton aide who was working on the Whitewater affair when he apparently committed suicide. And the Rose law firm, where Mr. Foster and Hillary Clinton were once close colleagues, has been accused of shredding documents relevant to the investigation.
The president said, well, nobody did anything wrong. If they're not concerned, why are they having these secret meetings?
The president is right at the precipice that Richard Nixon crossed, that what he needs to do right now is fire the people who caused the problem.
President Clinton says Whitewater is a distraction, but the secret meetings smell of a cover-up, even though no one has discovered anything which would need to be concealed. Bernard Nussbaum is the first sacrifice, but he may not be the last. Gavin Esler, BBC News, Washington.
Here, the Northern Ireland Secretary, Sir Patrick Mayhew, and the Irish Foreign Minister, Dick Spring, have both expressed continued faith in the future of the Anglo-Irish Peace Initiative. Sir Patrick and Mr Spring were speaking after meeting in Dublin, and their comments follow a threat last Monday from the Ulster Unionists to boycott the negotiating process. From Dublin, our Ireland correspondent, Dennis Murray.
The two ministers were meeting in advance of a full Anglo-Irish conference next week, but there's no doubting the problems created for the governments by the position of the Ulster Unionist Party. It now wants no part of the format for talks to which both governments are committed, the so-called three-strand process. After today's meeting, the Northern Ireland Secretary tacitly accepted that as a setback. But he also said the Unionists would keep talking despite their present stance.
Well, I don't recognise that position. I think that it is plain that Mr Molineux and his party will continue, at present in the bilateral mode, with bilateral talks between themselves and the British government, and on the same basis as before.
I was disappointed with some statements that were made on Monday last, but from my discussions with the Secretary of State, I'm now quite hopeful that the Unionist parties will be prepared to get back in three-stranded talks, and I think that's what we all want to work for.
The government say their joint declaration on peace will stand, but criticism of that's growing, and Sir Patrick acknowledges there's no early prospect of resuming round-table political negotiations. So while there's no doubting the overwhelming desire for peace and political agreement, the difficulties in achieving either are growing, not lessening. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Dublin.
It's been confirmed that the Labour leader John Smith has asked the Prime Minister for cross-party cooperation on the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which comes up for renewal next week. In the past, Labour has voted against the measure. Mr Major is understood to have offered to give the proposal serious consideration, though Downing Street said it couldn't comment on a private meeting. Labour believes Mr Smith's approach is being opposed by the Home Office and is accusing the government of leaking details of the meeting to the Sunday press. The Lord Chancellor has been accused of wrongly interfering with a judge's independence in an attempt to save money for the Treasury. Lord Mackay had said the judge was wrong to believe that people appealing against an industrial tribunal should always be able to put their case in person, and he told him that if he didn't agree, he should consider his position. One former appeal judge tonight said the move may have been unconstitutional.
The Employment Appeal Tribunal decides whether industrial tribunals have interpreted the law correctly. Many of the people who bring appeals don't have lawyers of their own, and that means their cases take longer to hear. Mr Justice Wood, the High Court judge who headed the appeal tribunal, insisted that all applicants had a legal right to appear at a hearing. Tomorrow's Observer says the Lord Chancellor put pressure on the judge to dismiss hopeless cases without letting applicants have their claims investigated at a preliminary hearing. That would save time and money, but the judge refused.
Last March, a letter arrived here from the Lord Chancellor. Lord Mackay's message was clear enough. If Mr Justice Wood was not prepared to stop using preliminary hearings, he should consider his position. Other judges have seen this as an attempt to put improper pressure on Mr Justice Wood by trying to influence the way he carried out his judicial duties.
One recently retired appeal judge suggested tonight that the Lord Chancellor's behaviour could be unconstitutional.
It demonstrates the danger of interference by the executive for purely Treasury-driven motives upon the function of the judges in their own particular sphere, and that is what I would consider an unacceptable interference with the independence of the judiciary.
A spokeswoman for the Lord Chancellor denied that he'd acted improperly by asking Mr Justice Wood to consider his position. She said Lord Mackay was simply doing his duty. But the episode demonstrates the conflicting pressures when the most senior judge is also a cabinet minister. Joshua Rosenberg, BBC News.
Now with news of a return to form, at least for England's rugby players, and the rest of the sport, here's Helen Rollason.
England have kept alive their chances of winning the Five Nations Championship with a courageous victory in Paris. Written off after a home defeat against Ireland a fortnight ago, England responded by beating France 18-14.
After the debate over selection and strategy, plus the resignation effective later this month of manager Jeff Cook, it was a win from which England in general and stand-in kicker Rob Andrew in particular took immense satisfaction. This provided an early 3-0 lead, but for most of the first half they relied on determination in defence as France built up possessional supremacy to then threaten the English line. Organisation and self-discipline kept them out. IOC President Samaran looked on. Most recently in Lillehammer, today he was assessing rugby as a potential Olympic sport. His marks for artistic interpretation would have been limited, but there was no doubting Andrew's technical merit. As this sailed over just before half-time, England had an unexpected 9-point lead. Just after the turnaround, he scored again with the boot, this time from open play. England 12-0 ahead, which only served to intensify the pressure. Eventually, the defence did give way to Benazzi's outstretched arm in the corner, though the officials had understandably missed what the camera had seen, Benazzi's foot in touch. The conversion was amongst a number of French chances subsequently missed, here because referee Hilditch refused a retake. But it was 12-11 when this kick, from Andrew again, put England into a position from which they re-established their 4-point lead, whittled down again to 1, before Andrew's 5th successful penalty out of 6 finished matters at 18-14. England unexpectedly victorious, but again without crossing their opponent's line.
We'd like to score a try before too long, but if we keep winning like that, we won't worry too much, you know. How many other Five Nations sides come here and win?
So England's crisis clear-out has been averted, or perhaps just delayed. Wales visit Twickenham a fortnight today. Rob Bonnet, BBC News.
The match in Dublin between Ireland and Scotland ended in a 6-all draw. 2 Gavin Hastings penalties gave Scotland a 6-3 lead early in the second half. But Ireland deservedly drew level when Eric Elwood kicked his second penalty of the match with 10 minutes remaining. Scotland must beat France in their final game to avoid the wooden spoon. England need to beat Wales by 16 points in a fortnight to win the championship on points difference and deny Wales the Five Nations trophy. Blackburn Rovers' pursuit of Manchester United at the top of the FA Premiership continues. Tim Sherwood made sure of today's win against Liverpool at Ewood Park. Manchester United's home game with Chelsea is featured on Match of the Day after this programme, along with the games at Sheffield Wednesday and Tottenham. If you don't want to know the results, look away now. Ian Wright confirmed to the England manager, Terry Venables, that he's fit again. Wright scored a hat-trick in Arsenal's resounding win at Ipswich. After the trauma of the last 48 hours for Celtic, the Scottish Premier Division club has bounced back to win 1-0 at St Johnstone. Before the game, the club's new owner, Canadian millionaire Fergus McCann, who takes over as full-time chief executive on Monday, received a rousing reception from Celtic supporters. A penalty from Mark Hateley in the dying seconds ensured that Rangers beat Motherwell. Rangers lead the Premier Division by 6 points. Viewers in Scotland can see Aberdeen's home game with Hearts after this programme. England's cricketers have lost the 4th one-day international in Trinidad to the West Indies, and with it the series. Needing 209 runs from 36 overs to win a rain-interrupted match, England made 194 for 9.
For Mike Atherton to put the opposition in after the mauling in St Vincent seemed to invite trouble, and he got it as the West Indies galloped away again at 6 and over. The stampede was barely impeded by Fraser striking twice in the same over, with Desmond Haynes bludgeoning his way to a 17th one-day century, leaving England with a rain-amended target of 209 in 36 overs. A good start was imperative, but not forthcoming. Stewart out for 2. For a while, Smith and Atherton prospered, but not quickly enough, and after both had perished pursuing a mounting asking rate, it was a lost cause. Mark Ramprakash, 3 weeks without a game, boldly tried to retrieve it with a late flurry. But once he'd gone, the match and the series disappeared with him. Kevin GIGRICH, BBC News.
And the 5th and final one-day international of the series is in Trinidad tomorrow. Peter.
And that's all from the newsroom tonight. Good night.
Taking breakfast with Frost tomorrow morning will be the Home Secretary Michael Howard at 8:15 on BBC One.
I feel like they just played Russian roulette with my life and my child's life.
I don't know of any other government that kills their own children in experiments.
The secret tests on the human guinea pigs. Panorama reports, Monday, 9:30, BBC One.
Hello, everything is coming at us from the west, from the Atlantic. This means not very cold over the next few days. It means not very special weather either, but at least probably better than winter. These weather fronts too bringing very windy, wet weather to many places in the next 24 hours. You can see the thick cloud coming in from the Atlantic. Some showers over Britain at the moment. You can see those on the radar, some pretty hefty ones too. The computer shows those showers, some snow over the Scottish mountains too. Later on in the night, heavier, more persistent rain getting into the north and the west of Britain. The winds increasing in the north and west to gale force as well. Dry all night in the east and the south, and quite cold too, with a touch of ground frost there in places. Most places staying substantially above freezing. That's tomorrow's weather chart. Lots of lines, so a windy day. The weather front's meaning a cloudy day too, with rain at times in the north and the west of Britain, where some of it will be quite heavy too. Lots of dry weather in the east and the south, even a little bit of brightness, probably no significant rain in the southeast until the evening, but some fairly heavy windy rain in the north and the west. Later on in the day, somewhat brighter but very showery weather getting to those northern and western districts, and staying mainly dry still, at least until evening in the southeast there. Temperatures, they don't look bad, 10 Celsius, it's 50 Fahrenheit after all, but even windier than today, so it's going to feel even fresher than today. Good night.
The police had adopted the codes and values of the underworld. Gangsters in uniform abused the power of the law and allowed vice kings to buy immunity.
He was always drunk when I met him. I don't know whether to take this money, Michael. So I said, come on, take it, you know.
He'd give a fiver to a constable or a tenner to a sergeant, a little more to an inspector, and up it went.
Sex, lies and bent cops. The dirty business of the underworld. Wednesday at 9:30 on BBC One.
And from fact to fiction with Stephanie Powers in our thriller for Saturday night, she was marked for murder at 11:30. Top football action between now and then on BBC One with Ray Stubbs.